Where are we today, Phil?
Bookwell Street, the top of Bookwell Street, where it joins Lou Street over that way. This archway was the doorway that led into the old Ring a Bells pub that stood at Worcester Street at the time of the Civil War, down towards the Barbican. When they demolished that building, for some reason they saved this doorway and moved it up here. So it's just an interesting piece of architecture that would have been here during the Civil War. And I wonder how many people actually walked through that doorway during that period. We're just going through the doorway now. Up to the top. This is Lou Street, the top of Lou Street. This street was here in the Civil War. Different houses, but it was here during the Civil War.
Tell me, Phil, are there any other reasons why Plymouth was so against the king in the Civil War?
There was. People have short memories. Sir Walter Raleigh was a Plymouth favourite for years, one of Queen Elizabeth's favourites, as everybody knows from history. When James I came in to the crown, to the throne, he disliked anything Elizabeth liked. So the old sea dogs that were left, he had no time for any of them. At one time, Sir Walter Raleigh was arrested and incarcerated in the Tower of London for a long time. And I've actually seen the room he was in there. He stayed in. It's all made up to look at the period. He was released. He was eventually released, and he promised James, he told James he would go to South America, fit out an expedition, and come back with boats full of treasure. This didn't work. He never found El Dorado. He came back to Plymouth. Because of his failures, he was arrested on trumped-up charges of treason, and in 1618 he was executed. This didn't sit well with Plymouth, who loved Raleigh. They loved Drake, Raleigh and Hawkins, and a lot of people still remembered them at this time in history. So that's another reason why Plymouthians, they never forgot. As well as talking about St Andrews earlier, the reasons there. Another reason was pirates. Corsairs from Algeria, Morocco, would often prey upon English shipping in the Channel, especially down in Devon and Cornwall, where coastal villages were actually raided and people were taken off and sold as slaves. This did no good for our merchant and fishing industries. Plymouth relied on fishing. It was a big part of our income in those days, and these industries were sort of wrecked because of this for a time. We wrote to the king and asked him for some help. Some of the naval ships, he didn't help. He said, I'll help if you pay. So they brought in a ship tax. It was called a shipping tax. And it was awful. It was very expensive. Devon had one of the highest monies to be paid out. Their subscription was massive, thousands of pounds. The people of Plymouth said, well, we haven't got this kind of money to pay. So the king said, if you don't, then you won't get any help. And there were stories that when these pirates were attacking English ships of the Royal Navy that were in the area did nothing to help. This faded over the years. In the late 1630s, this would fade out when the Navy did get stronger. Shipping money did come into it a bit more and pay for these ships. Another reason why Plymouth went against the crown was in the early 1620s, Prince Charles, as he was then, James I's son, was looking for a wife. So he went to Spain with the Duke of Buckingham, hoping to get a marriage agreement with the Infanta of Spain. This was refused, so Charles came back home, disgruntled. He got in with Buckingham, and they devised a way to start a war with Spain. He influenced his father, James I. James agreed to it, and in 1625, James had died by now. Charles was now king. He carried it on. He brought an expedition together, sailed off to Cadiz, failed dismally. When they came back, a lot of the soldiers were sick and disease had broken out on the ship. There was no fresh fruit, no fresh vegetables, no fresh meat. Water was bad. Wounded soldiers with sores and bad wounds were all put ashore. 5,000 or 6,000 men were put ashore in Plymouth and billeted on the locals, not just in Plymouth, but in the surrounding country around. That means we had to pay for them. Money came down from London to reimburse the council, but it was never sent. It was always delayed. It was and when it got here, some of it was missing. Now, the Duke of Buckingham and James Bagg, who lived at Saltram House, Sir James Bagg, always communicating together, always writing together. Where's the money for the ships? They asked the Crown. Duke of Buckingham said it's been sent. Nothing was sent. So for 30 weeks, these soldiers and sailors were billeted in Plymouth. It caused chaos. Over 1,000 people died of disease in Plymouth at that period, disease and illness. These soldiers and sailors rampaged around the town, causing chaos. They robbed, they raped, and they abused the citizens of Plymouth. Eventually, they were taken away. They were moved, and some sort of normality came back to Plymouth. 2 years later, King Charles decided to help the Protestants of La Rochelle against Louis XIII. King Louis XIII of France was a Catholic king. And he put up with these Protestants. They were in La Rochelle, he put up with them until he heard that England was trying to send help over, and then he laid siege to La Rochelle. Just before this expedition set off, it was brought to Plymouth. Again, the soldiers were billeted here. Money was short. Where was the food? You have people writing. The Mayor of Plymouth, the Governor of Plymouth Castle, Sir Ferdinando Gorgas, wrote to the King asking for money to pay these soldiers. In fact, at one stage, there was a near mutiny in Plymouth, and the mutineers were arrested. They broke into the Guildhall. This was all another reason, and this is only in the late 20s. So in 1642, when the Civil War happened, 12 years later, people still remembered. But one of the interesting things is Plymouth might have declared for the king. In 1642, the governor of Plymouth Castle and the fortifications and Drake's Island was a man called Sir Jacob Astley, who was a veteran soldier of the 30 Years' War and a good commander in Plymouth. In fact, he left Plymouth to join the king because the king called him away. If he'd have stayed in Plymouth, Jacob Astley, the town might have just gone with the king like the whole of Cornwall did. But because he moved, the king called him up to command his infantry and his army, his new army. The council took over the town. The mayor and council of Plymouth took over the town's fortifications. And like the big towns of Devon, Exeter, Barnstaple, Dartmouth, they declared for Parliament.
Thank you, Phil.
Was that interesting?